Hi everybody, welcome back. This is Phil Demetriadis. So today we're moving into part 2 of texture, okay? And if you go over and check the class blog, okay? 1 second here. Okay, you'll see that I updated and I put all the information that we're going to be working on in regards for texture. So this is what I want you guys to be doing. First thing is you're going to take, you don't have to use this and you don't have to keep big heavy black lines around it, but I want you to make swabs like this. I want you to make, there's 15 here. I want you to go around and take a look at basic textures and I want you to create a swab list of textures, okay? When that's done, okay, let's hit escape, let's go back here. You're then going to go and you're going to have something similar to what's right here, okay, variant textures. When that's done, you're going to go back, you might end up with something like this, okay? We're going to go back and we're going to do a series of gradients, okay? We're going to produce gradients that are going from a dark to a light. So from, I prefer to think of it as dark as number 10 and 1 as being number light. So if you, some of you that I have a little bit later, once you get into environment design or digital painting, when we start talking about understanding values and how those values represent in a world of tone with light coming from a direction, we refer to them as 1 to 10. Okay, 1 being really light and then 10 being that dark value. Okay, so you're going to have something that looks similar to like this. Okay, I'm going to show you in a minute. If you want to, you can even come in and you could take a traditional piece of paper. You can work on that. If some of you want to work digitally, that's totally fine. I really don't care. I can create these same results right here by using I can grab that piece of paper and I can import it into Sketchbook Pro and draw on top of it. So it's completely up to you on how you want to work. I prefer that you guys, you know, if you work digitally, still print your work at 11 by 17 so it's viewable, okay? But this is basically what we're going to be doing. And then we're going to, after we're done with this week, okay, and by the way, I'm not going to give you, this isn't all due on next class, okay? I'm going to give you the rest of today to work on it. And I'll give you some time over the weekend, and I'll give you Monday. And then I'll go into the second part, which is where we start to apply this base texture into drawings. And that'll be drawings of fish, animals, bugs, flowers, anything that's organic that has nice texture to it, okay? So that's pretty much what we're going to be working on. So what I'm going to do for you is I want to show you how you can just grab this image right here. I'm going to drag it to the desktop, okay? Now you can make your own in your sketchbook. I'm going to go over them, and I'm going to start to put in some textures. And then there's another part to the assignment. If you see here, I've listed 3 parts to this assignment. 1, you're creating the 15 textures. 2, you're going to create 15 gradients then based off those textures. And number 3, you're going to take some of your favorite textures and apply them to curved surfaces of geometry to see what the geometry is looking like. And I'm going to do that for a demo for you today so you have a better idea of exactly what I'm talking about. Okay? All right, so let me minimize this window and let me come over here to Sketchbook Pro. And what I'm going to do is, you know, it's easier for me in class to record the lectures this way. Let me come over and let me add image in here. And then I have on the desktop here. Now you can do this any form that you want. If you decide to do your textures in a format like that and you want to label them, that's totally fine. Okay, if you decide not to do that and you want to come over and you want to do your textures laid out in an image that looks like this, that's totally fine, okay? So what I'm going to do right now, let me transition over to the Cintiq for a minute here. I'm going to drop these down since I'm working digitally, and I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to start to work a little bit. Now, when I work on this particular subject matter, I do this quite often in my sketchbook because it's not always just about drawing things that I see. A lot of times I stop to look at textures because one of the jobs that I do professionally, I'm often asked to, I model in Maya, and a lot of times I'm often to prep textures that are going to go into, they're going to be handed off and given to a 3D modeler that they're going to apply to a particular 3D model. They're going to wrap the exterior of that model. They're going to go over all the vertices, and they're going to wrap basically a texture around a model, okay? So, you know, a lot of times in my sketchbook, I just sit around and I think of something new, or I might look at something really close. I'll take a picture of it. I've actually seen, like, I know it sounds crazy, but I actually have a whole library of textures that I take with my phone and I save them on my main computer at home because even when I'm painting in Photoshop, I can apply those textures to part of a a digital paint that I'm doing, and I can get a really cool, realistic look to something. And something else you can do, some of you don't know this yet because you haven't had Photoshop, but you can also take a texture pattern in Photoshop and you can load it in as a channel, and then channel is basically like a hidden selection, so when I paint over it, the texture shows up on my painting. It's almost the same principle as a silk screen. Okay, so what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to switch to black, okay, not to blue, and I'm going to just start with like a basic, you know, if I start thinking of textures and texture patterns, okay, I made a couple comments to you guys. Let me see if I still have the blog up here, okay, on some examples. Remember I told you a couple tips that you can do when creating textures. One was high point versus low point detail. The other one was contrast versus open areas. There's a third tip I'll give you a little bit later as we're working, okay, which has to deal with fade off. Okay, so contrast, you know, open areas versus small areas, high point versus low point detail. I'm going to talk about that right now. So what are some basic textures that we all know? A lot of you guys had basic drawing. Here's my big thing about basic drawing is you're exposed to cross-hatching. Okay, ooh, all right, definitely prepares you for the world of art. Okay, what else are you exposed to?
Stippling.
Stippling. Anything else? That's it. So if you're lucky in a basic drawing class, you might have a little bit of just a basic outline on just those subject matters, right? So here, what I like to do is I like to stop. Right now I'm going to sort of get into the sort of high point and low point where I'm just sketching some round shapes in here. Okay, now I'm doing this rough, you can see. So I've just sketched a couple of basic shapes. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here with a line, and I'm just going to sort of, you know, draw this line in here. And by doing this, I'm creating that high point and low point by putting the line in here as smooth as I can on sort of my first pass. Okay, I'm basically creating a little bit of a organic feel or texture to this. Now here's one approach of doing it. If I wanted to, there's a whole another approach I could do for this type of line. I could hold shift down, put it on another layer, drag it on top of it, and then erase what's underneath there, but that's okay for right now. Okay, there I have a base texture, and I can even come back in here. I can crosshatch some of this if I like, so I'm going to do that. So what I'm doing is by coming over and putting this little detail and having the white pop out, this is what I refer to as the high point versus the low point. Okay, I'm basically getting the more value in little cross-hatching elements that I put down, the more that black area drops down as if you think of it as like the cracks or the crevasse of part of a texture, and then everything else that sits on the top of it now acts as the high point of it. Does that make sense? So another way to look at it in terms of values is pushing and pulling. So if you want to throw down values and erase from it, you can actually do something that's very similar. So here, watch, let me jump over to another texture. Okay, sorry, I keep hitting the marquee tool like I'm in, keep forgetting that I'm not in Photoshop. I love Sketchbook Pro for drawing, but now watch. So here, I can take that and I'm gonna come over here to my basic, I have a basic selection there, and I grab my marker tip here, okay? This here where my flow is. Let's make the size a little bit better. Okay, and that sounds good. It's weird. I noticed the Sketchbook Pro. Yeah, that's why it's the older version that's free. It's not the 2017 version. Okay, so look, now I'm going to come over here. Now that I have that selected, so I see how I just came across there, but what I didn't like is part of that flow was a little too rich. So I'm going to bring this window back open here, drop the flow down like that. Okay. And I'm going to try to get a nice little flow that's in here like this, okay? Now, since I'm working digitally, so imagine if you did that on your paper, you just smeared it, right? So now I could come over and I could take, there's a couple things I could do. I could come in here and I could take a selection and I could delete from there, or I could take my eraser tip. So if I come down to my eraser, I can come over here and I could sort of put these little scratchy marks that are in here like this, okay? So I'm just trying to think of all different variants and ways that I could create some textures. Okay. So that still has a feel to it. It's a certain type of of base texture of some kind. So what I'm going to do is come over here with some light lines, go around some of that right now. This is how I create some of my bumpy textures when I'm working in Photoshop. Now Photoshop's much more efficient because you have all the wonderful layer options and you can really get in there and really create some really fantastic looking textures very quickly. Okay? So there, that's sort of one option. Let me finish this up really quick here. There. I'm going to hit deselect. Okay. Now I have sort of another texture there that's really basic and simple. So I'm just going to go along and I'm going to keep doing these things. Now, we all know what crosshatch is. We all know what stipples, right? What happens if we come over here and you take a series of lines and you put them in groups of 3 or 4? I mentioned this in the last demo. Sometimes we do that for showing contour on something. So what happens if I come over here and I do something like this? I do sets of like 4 or 5. I enjoy doing this because it gives me the freedom to come up with something that I never thought about in terms of texturing. And if you know anything about Photoshop and working with brushes, it then gives you the ability to create a really cool sort of brush based off of this information. So what's pretty cool about that texture I just created is it has sort of a woven pattern. Do you see that? It starts to look like little pieces of woven fabric sort of overlapping each other, okay? And then if you want to, I could even come back and where the ends are meeting certain ends, I can put a couple more sets of lines in there and I can define these up a little bit more. And if you have to, if I don't want you to forget how you created part of your texture, so if you create a texture that you really like and you're trying to remember exactly how you made it, come back and make some little notes to yourself underneath the texture. I'll do that in just a second here. So do you see how really quickly I start to get this pretty cool looking little feathered texture there? So, you know, I'm always trying to think of something new that's different. Okay, let me do one more really quick. All right. So I'm going to come over here and let's start with, I like that sort of pass. I'm wondering what happens if I do like little semicircle textures. Let's try that as an example. Okay, so come over here. I meant to. So I immediately start to notice it gives me the feel of like scales, right? So I need to decide, do I want those textures? Now that I did all those separate, what if I come in and start putting some lines underneath all of those? Okay. So I started with all different sizes, right? Okay, so there. So now I have a different type of pattern. Okay, it's a little bit different. I still want to come back and I want to put a couple little lines in there and darken a couple of those edges, see what happens. there's nothing wrong with going in and trying to get a little bit of a gradient flow to some of them. So in some of the positive and negative spaces, I'm going to come back in and try to get little, lines going across some of that hatching. Again, I'm going for that high and low thing where I'm trying to get surface texture to point down. So if I want these round elements to pop, I need to come in here and get sort of some of the negative spaces in here that don't have anything on them. Doing these little gradients, okay? I'm always rushing when I do a demo. If I was at home, I'd be taking my time a little bit more on some of these, or if I was in my sketchbook. Okay, so there, now I have a different type of feel, right? So sometimes what I do is I'll stop, I'll come back, I'll look at another piece. So let me come back over here. I'm looking at this one and I'm like, hey, I like that, but maybe I want to put some more crosshatch in there, get more of a dark to light flow of what's happening in that. So I do that quite often, where I stop one thing, come back, look at it. I have some negative spaces in here. I'm going to see if I can't darken some of the edges here. Get a little bit more of a gradient flow coming through some of this. And then I can come back and erase anything that I don't like in there. So again, so we're talking about values, I talked about high point, low point, right? By placing those values in a little bit against the white, it's going to allow these other parts to sort of pop out. Now I can come in and I can erase a little bit. You guys should have your electric erasers that you can use to your advantage. Those nice crisp sort of edges in there. Notice my tool is, there we go. So I'm going to press down pretty hard to get it to erase right. Okay, so there. So right there I spent a couple minutes on this demo and I already have 4 base patterns, okay, that I want to do. Okay, so the next part then is going to, for me to take one of my patterns and to put them in a line and basically go in and darken them from a dark to light ratio, okay? And let me show you how we're going to do that really quick. Now, I'm pretty lucky because I happen to have these on a layer here. So what I can do is if I wanted to, I could literally come over here and I could take part of this and I'm just going to, I'm not going to say the word cheat, but I do this in Photoshop all the time, right? I can take that texture now. So now I'm going to turn that into a gradient. I copied from that layer. Here, I'm going to turn this off right now. I'm going to add in another layer. I'm going to hit paste. And where that pasted there, that's fine. I'm going to hit paste again. And now I'm going to move that little texture over a little bit more, put it about here. I might, just for the fun of it, I might rotate it a little bit and see if I change a little bit of the flow or the pattern that's there. Okay. And then I'm going to hit deselect and look at it. All right. Now I'm going to paste it again. Now I know some of you guys don't have the ability to paste, but that's fine. Just do it manually. It won't take you that long to do a gradient. Okay. It's literally about 3 tabs, maybe 4 tabs over. Let me hit paste again. I'm going to move this guy over and let me rotate him again so the patterns look a little bit different. Okay. And about, there's 90. 90's there. Okay. Move that over about so. Okay. Now what I'm going to do, oops. Accident, sorry about that. Let me rotate him again. That's fine. About there. 0. Move them over. I wasn't quite touching them. There it goes. Okay, deselect. All right, so now I'm going to merge. Hold on, let me drop this layer down to this one. Merge that one into that one. Merge that one down to here. Okay, there. So now I have this dedicated layer. So what I'm going to do here, and that's why I was telling you, if you guys end up wanting to work digitally, that's totally fine. Okay. My goal now is to get a dark to light transition in that texture. Okay, so I just talked about that a couple minutes ago. Dark being, this is my 10. Okay. Oh, I tried to draw and forgot. Hold on. Deselect. This is my 10. That's my 1. Okay. My 1 is my texture really lightening up quite a bit. Okay. with that in mind now, I can come back here. I'm going to go over to my marquee tool. I'm going to have a fuzzy eraser that's here, and I'm going to take my eraser. Let me make sure it's set really low, like about there, okay? And I'm going to come in here, close this off, and I'm going to lightly erase some of this and just get it a little bit lighter, okay? Just a teeny bit here. So we're going to get that gradient flow. My texture is sort of fading off a little bit. Make sure that line there is sort of matching a little bit. There, that's looking pretty good. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back in. You can see I already almost have that flow from dark to light in there. So even if you do a drawing and you do it out like that, you can take your kneaded eraser and you can thin down this texture just a little bit. Okay? Get them to blend in a little bit if you like. But now I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to start to darken parts of this and really push the values going from dark to light. So what's 10 again? 10 is going to be our dark, 1's going to be our light. So now I could come over here, okay, and I'm going to come in here and just basically start going over part of the texture that I already put in here in the same direction that I already put it, and I'm going to try to get it to be a lot darker. Now, one of the things you're going to notice when you do this is a lot of times you're going to notice, hey, I already had a lot of a lot of positive and negative spaces in there that didn't have any texture in there. Well, you could go in and you could start to fill these guys up a little bit, okay? And then come back, start to push some of these values. I'm going to work. I should work, sometimes I jump around, I don't mean to, but I'm going to come back in here and work from one side to the other. So I'm darkening this up, and by darkening, I'm really going to get some of these little pronounced negative areas in here to pop out a little bit more, okay? So I'm going along the ends and I'm sort of strengthening these contour lines that were on there that made it look like little pieces of fabric coming over. Okay. So this is something a couple of instructors, I learned some of this back in the day from my old instructor here, Mr. Miller. We used to talk about textures and surfaces. Also, this is something I know that Peter Hahn teaches over. I know this is something that they cover a little bit over at Art Center. A lot of people have been doing this for a while. In fact, if you look around, I think even in part of the Andrew Loomis book, you're going to find people talking about how to apply texture variants and gradient controls. Okay, it's a huge part of drawing, being able to get this in. Now I'm going to start to lighten up what I'm doing here a little bit as I'm fading over. And it's a little difficult sometimes. It's a little bit of a challenge because you have to keep going back and looking and assessing, am I getting that control from dark to light? And I am, but I still feel like I'm pretty light here. So let me come over and strengthen some of this stuff over here. And then I'm going to come back and darken this even more over on the side. But this is pretty unique. I mean, this is a little bit more of a complicated texture. In a couple minutes, I'll do another one that's a sort of a circle pattern, let's say. Okay? It is more complex because this particular texture has lots of little lines. It has grooves. It has positive, negative spaces. It has these little strand lines that are coming over and make it look like pieces of fabric. They're sort of woven together, But what's cool about this, what I like about doing this stuff digitally, or even in my sketchbook, is I could scan anything I've done, and I can bring it into Photoshop, and now I have a texture I can apply. I can load up and paint on top of it. Remember, Photoshop allows me basically to like silk screen whatever I have here, whatever I'm producing. And that's invaluable, really huge, especially when you get into photoreal painting. What's funny is that I get students sometimes that are like, I don't want to do the textures. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. But I want to be a concept artist. And it's like, well, how are you going to be a concept artist? And one of the things to do in concept art is photoreal painting and doing backdrops. So how are you going to do photoreal painting and backdrops if you don't know anything about textures? You're not. You're going to be stubborn and then have to learn it the right way. Okay, so I know it takes a little bit of time trying to finish this up here. But I really like sort of the effects that I'm getting. It has that woven basket and a little bit of almost like fur effect to it, right? Let me just come over here and strengthen a couple little areas right in here. right in there along this edge. I have a little bit of positive and negative in there. A little block in there. There, so I'm pretty happy with that look right there. Okay, I like how it's developing. Okay, so here, let me do one more. So let me turn that off really quick. Let's deselect. I'm going to come back here. Let's turn these back on. Let's go for, I'm going to take this circle pattern right here, and I might develop this guy a little bit more. Okay, so I'm going to grab this guy, copy and paste him over. Okay, copy, and sorry, I'm like zoning out. I'm all, what did I do? I didn't turn off the layer there. And I'm going to paste this guy into here right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to then, let's go over here, let's zoom in a little bit more so it's a little bit easier to see. Okay, I'm going to come over, I'm going to pretty much do that same bracket, about the same size, which is about right there. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do here is I could copy and paste, but instead of doing that, instead of doing that, I'm just going to come in really quick and I'm going to draw everything again over. So I'm going to think, okay, I had a large circle here. I had that circle shape here. Maybe I have a smaller circle here. I have a larger circle. Trying to have some variance in part of this texture here. I'm going to come over here and then start to put some more hatching in there. A lot of times when you take something from just a swab and you start to develop it a little bit more, it changes all of a sudden. And then you start to notice this sort of cool texture, like what I meant by that is when I take it into a gradient pass. So if I wanted here, what's something I could still do? In my gradient pass, I could make the circles get smaller if I wanted to. So I could come over here and start with these like little circles that are sort of spread out, and then I could start going to some medium. Actually, let's try that. Let me come in here, and I'm going to start to erase some of these. So this might be a really cool pattern. So just the fact I'm talking about it with you guys set me into another direction, that if my circles start to get a little smaller, and here they're like way smaller. So, okay, now I got to get back in there and I got to do all that hatching that's in there, right? So, since I'm working digitally, I can think of a couple things I could do to save myself some time. I could draw a bunch of straight lines on another layer using Shift and then just put that back on top of itself and then erase from there, okay? Or I could do it manually. I'm going to go ahead and, so that's the benefit if you're working digitally. Let me go in here, try to get into this and do it manually really quick. So you can see I'm going from very large circle shapes in here, okay? And then I'm dropping down into much, much smaller, very tiny sort of shapes, okay? So give me a couple minutes here. I'm going to have to dive in here. I'm going to try to hatch this out as fast as I can. Okay, so I'm aiming at sort of these crosshatch diagonal selections. And it really starts to take quite a bit of time to get in there, but that's okay. I'm going to darken some of these. I'm going to come back and erase some of the overlines that are out of there. It's actually really good line control practice to get in here and try to do this and get it blending in. I I try to keep my lines as straight as possible and about the same space between them, but that's okay. If you miss up a line or two, don't worry about it. I'm going to crosshatch over it and take information out. If you wanted to, you could use your ruler, but then you're talking about a longevity of time here. And these are much more complicated. I'm going to go back and do a circle texture in just a little bit. Another one that might be just overlap of circle shapes, okay? And I'm already catching myself not drawing lines and wanting to do the squiggly thing. Man, you talk about a workout, I could feel my supinator muscle right here in my arm. Because I'm doing this, it's just getting totally pumped right now. This is great, right? It's like a workout. Get those supinators moving. Get pumped up. You can do it. We believe in you. I think what I'm going to do here is cheat a little bit. I'm going to sort of lighten these up a little bit. Widen up some of them. I'm going to come back and erase off. Hold on, I got to stand on the same feet here. Okay. All right, that's pretty cool for right now. And then let me come in and let me go against that grain then and start hatching vertically, and then I'll go across against it, try to blend these in. And as I get these here, I'm going to start going a little bit wider. Okay, and here, when I get over here, let me start to trying to go really light here. Much wider and break them up a little bit more. Okay, now I can go back and I got to turn right here and get off the chair. I got to go across part of these. Almost done. Thanks for being patient and waiting, right? There. Okay, let's just say that's my next gradient. Now what I'm going to do is go back again. You guys have your little electric eraser, right? I have mine here. I'm just going to go in and punch some of these little holes to make sure I don't have that over spray in there, or over etching I should call it. Takes me just a couple minutes to go over that. Okay. And then I notice that I missed this little spot over here with my etching. Make sure I get that in there. Miss that little spot. Okay, let's go back to eraser here. Erase this, erase that. There you go. So that's my next texture, right? I like it. It's pretty cool. And if I still could go back and darken it a little bit more with some time, okay? So there. So that's, now that that's done, sort of the next phase that I want you to think about, okay? And to be honest, I feel those are still a little bit light, is then I want you to go in and I want you to take, and you can do this on the same page if you want, okay? So if you wanted to, technically, you could do this, okay? You could go over. Now, I wasn't requiring you to do 15 of the applications. I wanted you to take like your favorite 5 or 6 of them and apply them to a piece of geometry. But this is what I would do for applying them to a piece of geometry. Okay, the difference in perspective is now the texture can change a little bit. So by taking any piece of geometry, let me come over here and sketch for you for a little bit. This is what I'm talking about. So for example, imagine if I have a piece of bark or something that looks like this. Okay, that could be a dedicated piece of geometry. If I wanted to, I could even wrap that a little bit. I could even curve it a little bit like so. Then it's going to be a little bit more complicated for me to draw, right? Because now I want to be able to take this texture and I want to be able to apply that texture to that piece of geometry. You see the difference? Okay, because now everything in my world changes all of a sudden. Okay, so let's go over here. I'm going to create another piece of geometry that's really basic. I'm going to just think of a piece of paper that has a light bend in it. Okay, either one of these would be great for you to do, and I'm going to sort of put a little bit of a line right in there too. So technically, you know, this form that's right here, they're both the same. It's just that one's turned a little bit. Okay, the reason for this, why is this so important? Because the next phase of drawing and being a really good draftsman is understanding this right here. It's understanding how to put textures on top of surfaces that adhere to this. They need to adhere to the contour line and the surface typology of the object. Does that make sense? So there are flowing lines right there. If I come over here, this is much more of an angle. Do you see how that goes up? I even drew that wrong. If I come up here and draw this, drew it wrong again. Sorry, that's me not being able to move the Cintiq, right? There we go, and I drop that down here, and then that curve's going to come down, and it's going to wrap up through here. See that? I need to know that in the back of my mind. That is really, really huge, because as I go in and I start drawing apples, and I start drawing lizards, and I start drawing all these really cool elements, right? This is a huge part of what is going to allow me to understand the flow of contour line and what I call the typology of an object. So if you could drop yarn on something, you need to understand part of that flow. Then here's something else that's really cool, right? Is that I even have the other cross contour lines that allow me to indicate perspective, and this is what I mean by that. Imagine if I have a line that's right here that goes across, and as that line recedes, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Do you see that? That allows me to show perspective. That creates depth. That means from right here, and as I wrap over in this direction to here, okay, my surface, the shapes between them are getting smaller because there's distance applying between those. Why is that really important? Well, a little bit later, when you guys get into environment sketching, and you guys have seen some of my demos that are already up on environment sketching, right? One of the first things that we do in environment sketching that I already talked about is I come in here into my basic drawing mode in one-point perspective, and I create a basic grid. And anytime I have a grid sketched out, the next thing that I do is I come in here, as I put my horizontal lines going across, I'm making my lines get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller because it's conveying depth. So I can see that the distance between the foreground, absolutely, should be more about there. I can see the distance between, let me go to red, between here to here, that distance is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Now this isn't perspective class. If I wanted to, I could figure out, there's a term for that called proportional division, and I could figure out exactly how small those boxes are going, but I don't need to be that meticulous with it, right? All I need to understand is that what I'm doing right now is I'm applying, I have typology. And remember I talked about the last demo when I drew that tree on the hill. To throw a hill in here, all I have to do is come over and draw my hill, and I just wrap part of my hill with rubber bands, and then by doing this, I now have a realistic mound in front of me. If I want to, and it depends on how you want to work. If you want to come over here, remember I talked about drawing from the ground up? So if I want to come over here, draw something from the ground up, throw a center line, find the height of a hill, and then create a little mountain that's there, and then I want to wrap this mountain with rubber bands and understand what's happening to the proportion of it, it's very easy to do, okay? All right, so that's the direction that we're going in, okay? And the reason why we're covering this right now is as we go in and we start drawing more complicated objects here, oops, Let me, where's my minus here? There it is. Okay, so we go in and we start to draw other objects. Oops, I'm in the wrong, sorry. Too busy talking, not paying attention. So as we go along, we start drawing, getting into more complex objects and having the ability to draw out of our heads. Okay, this is really, really imperative right here. Okay, did I have to look at something to create that texture? No, I made it from my brain. I made it from being cognitively aware that there are textures on surfaces. As I sit here and look out right now, some of you, I'm looking at some of your clothing items, right? I'm looking at your sweater that you have on, okay? Kai, and it has like a more thick feel to it, like a round cotton loop, okay? Some of you might have polyester. This shirt I have on is like a smooth cotton that's very soft, easy to stain, right? But it's very smooth, so because I always stain on my shirts, right? So I might have like really, really simple cross patterns or weaves in there, okay? You don't have to do a texture as complex as this, but you see where I'm going with this, right? So now I can come over here. I'm going to take these lines, and what I'm going to do is I would recommend that you guys think about having your lines in like this, very light. And then what I'm going to apply this texture from here, and I'm going to apply it to my little piece of geometry right here. Okay, so what I'm going to do really quick, come in here with my pencil. Okay, I'm going to draw it on another layer above it here, and I'm going to start my circle pattern. But in my circle pattern, I go from, oops, go back to black. Okay, I go from 10 to 1, right? So here's my 10, there's my 1. So I need to decide how I want to apply my 10 to 1 here on my piece of geometry. So I'm going to say that here is 10, there's going to be 1. Okay, so I'm going to come over here and I'm going to start to draw, okay, my circles. Now, a circle has something that we've talked about before. It has a major and a minor axes, right? So if we have a circle like this, we have these lines that go through it. Okay, one's called the major, one's called the minor. When it's a perfect circle, they're both equal. However, though, when I start to draw an ellipse that's more like this, now one of those becomes the major axis because it's longer. Why is that important to me? Well, remember the lines that are wrapping around here? I have to think of the major axes of this, and I have to get my circles to wrap around those lines, right? Because I'm adhering to part of the flow of the texture. In fact, when I get down to right here, if I sketch a circle, part of my circle is then going to come in and bend this way. Do you see that? That's why I like to put the little bend in the piece of paper, because it makes me think about what's happening to the flow of the contour line around my surface. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to keep putting some of these larger circle shapes. They're in here. But I end here really quickly. So now I'm going to have, as I get down to here, I'm going to have to thin down my circles a little bit more. Try to keep them along my contour line. Make these a little bit larger. Okay. And then these wrap up this way, right? So I might have So do you see where I'm going with that? Do you see how I'm wrapping the contour? Okay, let me finish up here in just a second. I didn't mean to, I wanted you guys to have time to draw today. I didn't want to eat up all of your time in here, but this is just really, really good stuff. You might even get a little bit of a bend. I might get a little bit of a jelly bean guy in there. That's okay. So not everything has to be completely perfect, right? And I look over between my large shapes. I had some other medium shapes. So I'm going to try to get some of those in here. Okay. All right. So now I'm going to go in there and I'm going to apply the same gradient thought. Okay. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to start to hatch up my guy. And as I get up here, that's going to be my 1, right? Okay, so I'm going to do that really quick. I know it'll take a couple minutes. Let me pause the recorder, and then I'll come back and I'll show you sort of like the before and after. Okay, for just a second here. Okay, I stopped for a second there because I started to talk and I wanted to mention this. I started to draw, but then I wanted to mention to you guys really quick, when I'm applying part of this texture, I have to be very careful. I had a series of lines overlapping each other that fading back, right? So after I put these lines in, which are going in the direction of this direction of the object, might not be a good idea to crosshatch like that at an angle, right? Because if I angle crosshatch, it's going to flatten my image because this is a rounding image going this way. Does that make sense? So what I might need to do is when I get into more texture detail and I start to make this dark, I'm just going to have to go back over it this way. But I'm wrapping now. This is the harder part. I have to wrap this line over part of the form that's there. Okay? And you can see as I start to do that, it starts to get a little bit darker. And I could come back and I could punch up these little areas and make them a little bit darker, and I can start to get some of that gradient feel happening as it's wrapping around the surface. Okay, so I'm going to continue. Maybe I'll just leave the recorder on. I'm afraid I'll think of something and want to mention it. And I want everybody to get it. Now, if I wanted to, I could even think about light. What if light was coming down and hitting the top of the surface, right? I mean, that's a whole nother direction I could go into. Is that if I think about light coming down and that I have light hitting right here and there's a highlight, then it could lighten there, and then as it ducks down right in here, this becomes dark right there. So I could even apply that if I wanted to. That's a little bit more advanced, but, you know. This is what I get for creating a more complicated texture. It takes a little bit longer to produce. Okay, bear with me for just a couple more minutes. Let's get that guy down, and then I'm going to come over here. I'm going to sort of try to open up these little patches that I'm drawing a little bit more and make them a little bit lighter. Man, if you do that long enough, your neck starts to hurt, right? Okay, now I'm going to come back and I'm going to throw these other lines going back over the cross contour, and I'm going to make sure they're matching part of the flow of the object that's wrapping over here, okay? That's really important to me that I get that down. And I'm going to start to darken up a couple of these little edges that are back in here to get sort of that feel of that 10 darkening, okay? Now I got to get up. Unfortunately, if you ever buy a Cintiq, don't buy the big 28-inch one that we have here in the classroom. They're good, man, but they're just, you can't rotate them. And you need to rotate. Your hand can only do so much when holding a pen because of the ratio of how you draw from the wrist. You only have a, huh?
If you rotate the screen.
Yeah, but it's just, I don't like doing that. It's a personal preference. It makes me feel dizzy that I'm drawing something rotated, but the screen is angled. I don't know if that's, every now and then I you know, even if I'm in a car, I get a little bit of that dizzy feel, right? You know? So for me, I just like to keep it, I know that doesn't make sense probably, Daniel, but that's just the way I am.
Everyone's different.
Everyone's different, that's right. And I grew up, maybe it's also the way I grew up, is being able to flip a drawing, turn a drawing at an angle, but I'm still drawing like this. I'm still, you know, perpendicular to the piece of paper, if that makes sense. Okay, so you can see where I'm starting to go with that. If I put in a couple more minutes into here and get a little bit more hatching in there and start to darken up. Notice that my brush is a little, I feel like when I'm drawing with it, something's been changed on it. Maybe it's just the hardness. There. That's a little bit easier. Okay. All right. So I'm going to call it for right there. Remember, you guys also have the power of smudge. If I can't smudge here, but what I can do is if I wanted to, I can take my airbrush very lightly, and this would be the same principle of smudging, okay? And I could add another layer underneath here, and I could come over here and see I can start to darken a little bit of, hold on, it's huge there. So I can get that same control just working digitally, which is what I might have to do because it allows me to get a little bit more of that feel of the gradient happening. So you guys can easily sort of do this because you can just smudge something very quick and then you draw on top of the smudge. That's a secret though in drawing, right? If you don't draw on top of the smudge, you're going to end up having you're going to smudge all your lines. So don't do the smudge first in there and then come back. There. So you see how I have that feeling now of dark to light, but it feels like it's wrapping over part of the object, okay? That's imperative for me. So if I were to come down, do the same thing to the next texture. Now, I don't want you to have to do, you don't have to do 15 of those. If you want to, it would be a great learning exercise. But what I'm really focused on is you guys just go through really quickly, create a base texture, okay? And then I want you to go through and I want you to do the gradients on those textures, figuring out the feel of dark to light. Then I want you to go back and pick 5 or 6 of your favorite ones and put them on a piece of geometry like that. I'll give you the rest of today's class. You'll have over the weekend to work on it, and then I'll also give you part of Monday to work on it. And then on Monday, I'll give you another lecture where I start talking about going in and drawing like a fish, or going in and drawing objects or flowers or plants, and then applying textures, wrapping over those forms. So do you guys see that transition on what we're doing and how we're moving forward? Okay. So again, check back up on the class blog, right? You're going to see all these little variants in there, and I want you to be able to go through and just have fun with it. I mean, I did some more complicated stuff here because I did the high point and the low point, but the reason why I do that is because when I work in Photoshop, that gives me the best results very quickly for creating really cool textures. If you don't want to do high point and low point, and you can do whatever it is that your little minds can think of, okay? For example, hold on a minute, let me come over here. What if you just did squiggly chicken scratch, okay? Chicken scratch is still a given texture, okay? And you can have that work, oops. So if I come over here like this, all I have to do, what's chicken scratch? It's chicken scratch. Little circles, whatever you want to do. But then as you get down here, watch, I'm going to get a little lighter. Okay? A little lighter, a little lighter. So it doesn't have to be, the ones I did took a lot more time because they're more complex. I could still get a very cool looking texture out of this just by sitting here and drawing a bunch of lines overlapping all this. Now I'm going to go, but I'm going opposite directions. I don't know if you noticed that. I spun my pencil to the right, then I spun it to the left. Now I'm going to the right here a little bit more. I'm going to thin it down a little. And then I'm going to come back here and try to pick up the medium area. Now I'll go like smaller circles in here. Okay, but look at what's happening. I'm starting to create a gradient flow of something that's a texture. Okay? I don't know what it'd be a texture of right now. It almost looks like a beard, doesn't it? Looks like little hair follicles, or you know what else that could be? that could be the texture of like a ground plane. I could actually take that, copy and paste it into Photoshop and throw it through distorted perspective and create a really cool ground plane. I can show you how to do that later. It's a benefit of doing these little textures. So look, I didn't get super complex there, did I? I'm just scribbling. I'm going to make this a little bit darker, a little bit smaller. I think the first couple textures I did were very complicated. Okay, I mean, this is a complicated flow right there, but I love that basket. I mean, imagine those were, and by the way, I talked about making notes, right? These were 5, deselect, right? These were 5 patches next to each other, right? Remember when I did that? And then I turned to the next patch. So I talked about making notes. So I could call that in my notes that was 5 patch. These were large versus small circle. Make a note on it so you remember how you did it. What was this? This right here is just circles. I can call it chicken scratch. Actually, I shouldn't call it chicken. I'll call it chicken circles. Because chicken scratch is when you do this stuff. It's like chickens have been scratching something. So I can create a whole texture off of that. So this right here is something that I could apply very easily to something in Photoshop. In fact, I can save that after. We could do that as another demo. I could show you how I could even turn that into a brush in Photoshop. Which, by the way, I give you guys a little secret right now. Those of you that waited to the very end of the video, the secret to making really great brushes in Photoshop is having gradient controls inside them. Meaning that, okay, the more white you have in the Photoshop, the less flow of ink through the brush. The more black you have, the more flow of ink. So if I were to take any of these texture swabs and shrink them down and then go into Photoshop, I can turn them into beautiful drawing and painting brushes. Okay, so this was called chicken scratch, or chicken circles. There. So I remember how I created some of my content. And I can go back down and I can do another one, okay? But you got to be thinking 10 to 1. But first, just have fun and go back. Let me, go back and think about what we were just doing. Let me turn some of this off, sorry. Where are all my layers here? Sorry, I got too many layers. I'm too busy lecturing and not focusing. But first, before we start, what you should do today is you should be able to go through and you should easily be able to knock out 15 little swabs. So you have a starting point, okay? Part of art is having starting points, knowing where to progress from. So 15 swabs, get those done first, because if you start on the gradients first and start doing those, you get caught up in the rendering and the dark to light gradient. If you do the swabs first, it'll give you other ideas for other variants of textures. Because I could easily take this swab right now, and I look at that, and I'm looking, and I'm like, man, what if I did diamonds like that? Like little diamond shapes, I can have something totally different. What if I did curlicues? What if I came in here and I did little swaying curlicues like this, and that was a texture. And I just swayed them all out and copied and pasted them, okay? So use it to your advantage. All right, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.